They say weddings bring families closer, but sometimes they quietly show you just how far apart you've become. I wore the pink dress I'd been saving for years, baked the banana bread he used to love. I even ironed the cardigan with the tiny pearl buttons he once told me made me look like Mom from the old TV shows. But when I stepped into the wedding hall and realized no one had saved me a seat near him, I knew. Something in me shifted, and that shift would end up changing everything. Upper Michigan is quiet in the spring. Not quiet like peace, but quiet like being forgotten. My house sits tucked beside a still lake, surrounded by pine and memory. I live alone now. My husband Mark passed 4 winters ago. Our son Owen visits less and less, but I understand. Young people have their lives. That's what we raise them for, right? Lately, my days move slow. I bake banana bread in the morning, read the local paper over a lukewarm cup of coffee, then water the row of stubborn tulips out front that refuse to bloom in time. Sometimes I watch the mail truck go by without stopping. And sometimes I wonder if it's stopping for someone else down the road who also checks every afternoon and pretends they're not hoping for anything. Owen called 3 weeks ago to say he was getting married. He sounded excited, distracted, said her name was Lauren. I asked him what kind of wedding they were planning. He said they were thinking something simple but elegant. Then he trailed off. He didn't ask for my thoughts. Didn't ask what weekends might work for me. I asked if they'd need help with anything. He said not to worry, that they had it all handled. I told him I'd love to make the rehearsal dinner pie. He chuckled politely, said that was sweet. I hung up and stared at the phone for a while. I felt something then, something I didn't say out loud, like I had just been given the role of guest in a story I thought I helped write, but I chose to stay hopeful. I picked out the dress, cleaned the porch, even hemmed the sleeves of my coat. Because part of me still believed that maybe, just maybe, this wedding might bring us a little closer again. Sometimes the biggest losses don't come in shouts or slamming doors. They come in silence, in small, polite brush-offs that feel like 1,000 cuts, the kind of quiet that follows you into bed at night and makes you wonder when you stopped being needed. The wedding took place at a lakeside resort 2 hours south. Fancy place, all wood beams and floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the water. Owen had said it was Lauren's idea. She wanted something modern but timeless. I arrived early out of habit. Wore the pink dress I'd kept pressed for years, soft pleats at the waist, nothing too loud. My hair pinned back, light lipstick, the kind of outfit a mother would wear to her son's biggest day. I walked through the lobby alone. The girl at the front handed me a name tag and smiled like she had no idea who I was. The tag just said, Sylvia Hartley. No mention of mother of the groom. No little ribbon like the bride's family had. I held it in my hand a moment, then clipped it on. Inside the main room, people were gathering in clusters. Laughter floated above the soft music. Waiters moved through with trays of champagne and little spoons of something chilled and expensive. I spotted Owen near the front with Lauren, surrounded by people I didn't recognize. He didn't see me right away. One of the planners, a young man in tight slacks and a headset, waved me toward a table near the back corner. I looked around. The closer tables had signs. Groom's co-workers, bride's extended family, maid of honor's parents. My card just said Sylvia. No last name, no title. I sat down between a man who sold home insurance and a woman who raised alpacas in Vermont. Both were polite. Neither had ever met Owen. They talked across me most of the night. During the toast, the microphone passed to Lauren's father, her brother, then her college roommate. There was a joke about tequila shots and a memory from summer camp. At one point, someone asked when the groom's mom would speak. Lauren laughed and said maybe later, then moved on. When dinner came, it was plated and quiet. I had the chicken. It was dry. A butter roll sat untouched on the side. I noticed no one at my table finished their meal either. The desserts were fancier than they looked. One bite of the lemon tart, and I felt more bitter than sweet. Owen never made it to my table, not once. He danced with Lauren, then with her mom, then with someone's aunt. I waited, fixed the hem of my dress 3 times, smiled at a photographer who passed me twice without raising his camera. By the end of the night, I sat quietly in that rented chair, surrounded by empty plates and people already halfway to their cars. I folded my napkin slowly, slipped it under the rim of my glass. No one said goodbye. No one noticed when I left. A week passed after the wedding before Owen called. He said he wanted to have me over for dinner, just the 2 of us. Said Lauren would be out with friends. His voice was cheerful but measured. I could tell he was trying to sound casual. I told him I'd be there. No questions asked. That evening, I wore the same cardigan I had on when I first brought Owen home from the hospital. It still fit soft around the wrists. I baked a tray of oatmeal cookies and wrapped them in foil. The drive down was quiet. The roads were dry, the sky overcast in that flat gray way that makes you feel like winter isn't finished, even when the calendar says otherwise. Owen's new house sat in a tidy neighborhood on the edge of town. Brick exterior, trimmed hedges, the kind of place with matching porch lights and a doorbell camera. He opened the door with a smile, quick and polite, gave me a short hug that barely touched the shoulders. Said the kitchen was through the hall. Dinner wasn't ready. Instead, there was a table set for 2, a bottle of wine already uncorked, and a small stack of papers placed carefully beside the salad plates. The papers were clipped neatly with tabs and a blue pen laid diagonally across the top page. Owen poured me a glass, asked about the drive, complimented the cookies. His tone felt rehearsed, as if he were speaking through a script he had memorized but not written. Then he gestured to the papers. He said it was just something for peace of mind, in case anything ever happened to me. Said it would make things easier. Just a standard, durable power of attorney, a common form. Everyone's doing it. He said these things like they were weather reports. Distant, practical, emotionless. I nodded, reached for the packet. The words on the first page were thick with legal terms, but the language underneath was clear. Financial authority, real estate management, full access, immediate effect, no expiration. It didn't say son. It didn't say family. It said agent. It said authorization. It said control. He smiled and said no rush, but the pen was already uncapped. I noticed then that the plates on the table were empty. No food, no smells from the kitchen. Just wine. Just paper. Just a silent ask beneath a friendly tone. I placed the packet back down and told him I'd take it home. Said I'd look it over carefully. He nodded once and reached for his wine eyes, darting to the pen, then back to my face. He didn't argue. He didn't need to. His silence said enough. We talked about nothing after that. Weather, the neighbor's new fence, some show on cable I didn't know. When I stood to leave, he walked me to the door, hugged me again, even lighter than before. Back in the car, I didn't turn the engine right away. I sat there, hands in my lap, the foil-wrapped cookies still untouched on the passenger seat. The porch light behind me turned off after a minute. Motion sensor, efficient, automatic, just like the dinner. I got home that night and didn't bother to change out of my shoes. I sat on the edge of the couch, my coat still zipped halfway, hands resting on my lap like they didn't belong to me. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Even the clock in the kitchen seemed to have stopped ticking. For a moment, I wasn't sure if I was breathing. After a while, I stood up and walked down to the basement. My knees ached on the way down, and the air was cold, the kind that settles in old wooden beams. At the far end behind the laundry machine, there was a cabinet tucked low beneath a shelf of paint cans. I had to kneel to reach it. Inside was a small metal box. I hadn't opened it since the year Mark died. He always said if anything happened to him, I'd find what I needed in there. I'd never had reason to look before, but that night, something in me knew it was time. The lid creaked open. Everything inside was organized just like Mark always kept things. He was methodical that way. Neatly stacked folders clipped and labeled. At the very bottom was a letter with my name on it, written in his handwriting. My chest tightened just seeing it. The letter was short. A paragraph, really. He said he knew I wouldn't ask for help, even if I needed it. That he had set things up to make sure I'd never be trapped or dependent on anyone. He said not to tell Owen. Not because he didn't love him, but because he knew how the world worked. Money changes people, and sometimes it reveals who they already were. The files listed 2 accounts in my name, a portfolio of investments I never knew existed, stock options, mutual funds, and an annuity tied to a small property in Texas. Altogether, it was worth over $7 million. I stared at the number, then closed the folder, then opened it again, thinking maybe I had read it wrong. I didn't cry. Not then. I didn't feel relief either. It was something heavier, like holding a secret too big for the room. I sat there on the basement floor for a long time, the cold seeping into my legs, the metal box still open beside me. What I felt most was the weight of what Mark had left behind. Not just the money, the trust, the foresight, the quiet protection I never knew I needed until that night. He'd seen something coming before I ever did, and somehow, in his own quiet way, he had left me the one thing I needed most. Not safety, not wealth, choice. I closed the box, locked it, stood up slowly, my legs stiff, my hands shaking in a way that had nothing to do with age. Upstairs, I turned off every light in the house except the one in the kitchen, sat down at the table with a blank notepad and the stack of papers Owen had given me, and I began to write. Not what he wanted, but what I had to say. The next call came 2 days later, mid-morning. I had just sat down with a bowl of cereal, still wearing my house slippers. The phone buzzed once, then again. I let it go to voicemail the first time. The second time, I picked up. Owen's voice was smoother than usual, almost careful. He said he wanted to check in, see how I was feeling, asked if I had a chance to look over the papers. I told him I had. I kept my tone steady. He paused just a second too long, then said there was no rush, but that it would be good to get things in order. Just in case. I asked what he meant by that. He started to say something about planning, about being practical, about protecting me. But the words came in circles. He mentioned a story he heard on the news about a woman who lost access to her accounts after a stroke. Then he brought up his friend's mother, who forgot her passwords for months. I could hear it underneath. A list of reasons not rooted in concern, but in strategy. When I stayed silent, he cleared his throat. Said he just wanted what was best. Then his voice shifted slightly, the edge returning. He said if I waited too long, it might be harder to set things up. Said I should think ahead. Said the smart thing would be to sign now while everything was still simple. I looked out the window while he spoke. The trees were bare. A squirrel ran across the yard, stopped, then darted into a patch of brush. I watched it disappear and felt a sharpness settle behind my ribs. I told him I'd think about it. He said that was fine. Then added that Lauren had found a financial advisor who could help make everything smoother. That they'd be happy to set it up for me. We ended the call. I sat there for a long time, the cereal soggy in front of me. I couldn't move. I thought about all the nights I stayed up with Owen when he was sick, how I once drove 5 hours in a snowstorm to bring him a spare tire. Not because I had to, because I wanted to, because that's what love looked like to me. And now here he was speaking to me like I was a transaction, a logistical step. The house felt smaller than usual, the silence tighter. I got up, poured the cereal down the sink, and ran the water until the last bit of milk was gone. Then I opened the drawer by the fridge, pulled out the manila envelope where I had tucked away everything Mark left me, and held it for a while. It didn't feel like protection. Not yet. It felt like the last piece of something he built for me. And now, it was time I built something for myself. Not out of anger, but because even love has limits. And I had finally reached mine. It took me 3 days to decide what to do. Not because I was unsure, but because I needed the silence to mean something. I didn't want my next step to come from fear or pride. I wanted it to come from knowing, from understanding what was being asked of me and what I could no longer allow. I found Carol's number written on the back of an old birthday card. She used to work as a trust and estate lawyer before she retired. We hadn't spoken in years, not since her husband passed. But I remembered how she once said, "The quietest women often leave the most permanent marks." When I called, she picked up right away. Her voice sounded older but sharp. I told her what was happening. She didn't react, just listened. Then she said we should meet. No fuss, no judgment, just coffee and clarity. We sat at her kitchen table the next afternoon. Her home was small, neat, full of quilts and books. I handed her the envelope. She read through every line of Mark's documents, eyes moving like a woman who had read too many things too late for too many people. When she finished, she looked at me and said I had more power than I realized. That the money was protected, the investment strong, the legal standing solid. But only if I kept it that way. She asked if I wanted to establish a trust. I said yes. She asked who I wanted to name. I said no one. Not yet. Maybe never. She nodded. Then she told me to bring in everything Owen had given me. I pulled out the stack of papers from my bag. She flipped through it without flinching. She said the language was aggressive. Immediate authority sweeping access, no oversight. She said these weren't documents written to care for someone. These were written to absorb someone. We rewrote everything, transferred the accounts into a private trust under my full control. Locked access behind conditions no one could bypass. Carol added a medical clause that required 2 independent physicians to confirm any loss of capacity before any authority shifted. Then she handed me a pen. I signed slowly, carefully. Not because I was nervous, but because it felt like drawing a boundary I should have drawn years ago. A simple line across paper that said, I am not invisible. I am not a convenience. I am not yours to manage. When we finished, Carol slid everything into a thick folder. She told me to keep it somewhere I could reach it easily, but not obviously. I placed it in the back of the cabinet beneath the sink, tucked behind a box of dishwasher pods no one ever touches. Driving home, the air felt different, brighter somehow, not lighter, but sharper. Like I could finally see the shape of my life without squinting. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like someone's forgotten parent. I felt like a woman with a spine and a choice. The invitation came in a text. Owen said he wanted to try again. A proper dinner this time, just the 2 of us. No papers, no pressure. I waited a few hours before responding, then typed back one word. Sure. I didn't tell him I wouldn't be coming alone. Carol met me a block away and parked her car on the opposite side of the street. We agreed she wouldn't walk in with me. She'd sit nearby, wait, and step in if needed. I wasn't nervous. Not anymore. I had learned what it meant to be still without being soft. Owen opened the door smiling. Warm, casual. He wore a button-down and socks without shoes like he wanted to remind me he was still the boy who used to run barefoot through the hallway. The kitchen smelled like garlic and roasted vegetables. There was bread on the table. Real food this time, or at least the look of it. We sat. Small talk first. He asked if I'd been reading anything good. I mentioned a mystery novel I picked up from the library. He nodded, but didn't ask what it was about. His eyes kept drifting toward the side table where another stack of papers waited clipped and neatly arranged. Different from before, but not unfamiliar. When he finally reached for them, his tone shifted. Slower, more deliberate. He said he had spoken to a friend who worked in elder law, that they recommended a simpler arrangement. Nothing binding, just provisional. Just something to keep things smooth. He slid the papers toward me. I didn't touch them. Instead, I placed a folded document of my own on top. No words, just the sound of paper meeting paper. Then I reached for my water and took a sip. He looked down confused at first, then unfolded it. It was a formal notice of trust execution. My signature at the bottom. Full transfer of assets into private legal protection. Revocable only by me. His face didn't change right away, but his eyes did. They blinked more, and his jaw shifted like he had bitten something sour, but was trying to smile through it. I spoke carefully. I said I appreciated his concern, that I understood life was stressful, that planning was part of being responsible. But I had already taken care of mine. Everything was in place. Everything was final. He asked if I had talked to someone. I told him yes, a friend, someone who understood what it meant to be prepared without being pressured. The room quieted. He leaned back. His fingers tapped once against the tablecloth, then stopped. For a moment, he didn't look like a son or a husband. He looked like a man who had just realized he had run out of options. Carol entered just then, smooth, polite. She smiled, greeted Owen softly, and introduced herself, then thanked him for the dinner. She said we would be leaving now. I stood, gathered my coat, and followed her to the door without turning back. Outside, the air was sharp with wind. I exhaled slowly the way you do when something breaks loose inside you. Not out of anger, but release. For the first time, I wasn't walking away hurt. I was walking away certain. The next morning came colder than the forecast had promised. The kind of cold that settled in the floorboards, quiet and lingering. I made toast, poured a glass of orange juice, and sat at the kitchen table without touching either. My hands were still warm from the night before, but my chest felt like something had closed itself off. Around 10, my phone buzzed. One message, just one line from Owen. You made this harder than it had to be. No hello, no name, just those words. I stared at the screen for a long time before setting the phone face down on the table. The toast had gone cold. The juice no longer looked refreshing. There was no follow-up message, no apology, no explanation. And I knew in the way a mother knows that the words weren't about disappointment. They were about control. About a door he thought he could keep open forever, and now found shut. Later that day, I walked out to the garage to check a few boxes I hadn't touched in years. I found the photo albums. I opened one to a page from a Christmas long ago. Owen was 5 cheeks red from snow holding up a toy truck, smiling so wide I could count the spaces in his teeth. I used to frame that smile in my mind every time I was tired or scared. It had been my reason for a lot of things. But now I saw something different. Not just a boy, but a boy who had always gotten what he wanted without asking twice. Mark and I had made sure of it, not because he demanded it, because we thought love meant removing every obstacle, every weight. We gave too much. And somewhere along the way, he started to believe he was entitled to what wasn't his. In the afternoon, I received another text, this time from Lauren. She said she was sorry things had become tense, that they were just trying to plan responsibly, that if I ever wanted to talk, she was available. Then she wrote something that stayed with me longer than I expected. "You raised a strong son. We just wanted to support his future." I read it twice. The words were polite, polished, but underneath, I heard it clearly. "You had your time. Now let go." I didn't respond. I closed my phone and left it on the counter. That night, I poured the orange juice down the sink. Not because I was angry, because I didn't want to drink something that had lost its temperature. I stood by the window and looked out into the dark, the sky already pulling winter over the rooftops. I didn't cry. I didn't pace. I stood still. Because sometimes the loudest answer is no answer at all. And sometimes when a door closes, it's not meant to be reopened. Not by force, not by guilt, and certainly not by blood. The house had never been loud even when Mark was alive. But after the last exchange with Owen and the silence that followed, something shifted. The quiet no longer felt neutral. It felt like a verdict. I started moving slower through the rooms. Not because I was tired, but because there didn't seem to be a reason to hurry. The days took on a soft shape. I folded towels with precision, wiped down the counters even when they were clean, watered the plants at the exact same time each morning. I wasn't waiting for a call, but I still noticed when it didn't come. 3 days passed before the voicemail light blinked. I didn't answer the phone when it rang, but I did listen afterward. Owen's voice played through the speaker like it was coming from behind a door I no longer planned to open. He said he had overreacted, said he just wanted to make sure things were handled properly. Then he said something softer. He missed the way things used to be. He said he hoped we could talk again. Just talk. I didn't delete it. I didn't save it either. I let it sit there between digital dust and obligation. Later that night, I found myself scrolling through old text threads, ones I hadn't opened in months. There were photos from years back, Owen grilling in the backyard, Lauren holding a pie I had helped her make, a blurry picture of the dog we once shared before she got too old to climb the stairs. And then farther back, texts from when Owen still used too many exclamation points, when he still said things like "love you" before signing off. I clicked on one and stared at it. Just stared. Not trying to feel anything, just noticing what had once been. Then I started deleting them, one by one, not in anger, in acknowledgement. The last one I kept was a video. Owen at 10 holding a flashlight under his chin, telling a scary story in the dark, while I laughed in the background. My voice was younger, then lighter. I watched it twice, then closed my phone. I went to bed early that night, not to sleep, but to lie still. The bed felt larger, not emptier, just more honest. I had given that boy everything, and the man he became had used it to build a case against me. That was the hardest part. Not the greed, not the manipulation, but the realization that what I gave from love, he had repurposed into leverage. Somewhere along the way, I had stopped being a mother in his eyes and become a resource. And that was a grief no one warns you about. A grief that sounds like your own voice on a machine saying nothing back. I moved at the end of February, just before the snow melted completely. The new house wasn't far, still near the lake, but tucked deeper into a quieter street. Smaller, older, the kind of place with a crooked mailbox and shutters that rattled when the wind came off the water. But it felt right. Like it had been waiting for someone who no longer needed space to entertain, only space to exhale. I didn't bring much with me. Just what mattered. The photo of Mark on the bookshelf. The recipe cards, handwritten and smudged. A few boxes of books, the chipped blue kettle, and a ceramic owl from the garden that used to sit near the back porch and scare no birds at all. Most mornings, I walked to the library on Main Street. Not because I needed books, but because I liked the sound of pages being turned nearby. I picked up a few shifts at the front desk. Nothing official, just enough to feel useful. enough to keep my hands from reaching for things that no longer reached back. That's where I met them. The women who came every week. They weren't loud. They didn't wear matching coats or speak in groups. They arrived quietly, one by one, and stayed longer than they needed to. Some read, some wrote, some stared out the window like they were waiting for something that had already passed. There was Helen, who used to run a diner and now made quilts from her husband's shirts. June, who always brought peppermint tea in a thermos with her late sister's initials on it. And Margot, who carried a cane but never used it until she got near the front door. We didn't become friends all at once. It happened slowly, over shared thermoses, over nods exchanged at the same bookshelf, over the silent agreement that none of us needed to explain what we had lost, only that we still showed up. One afternoon, Margot asked if I wanted help with the garden bed behind the library. I said yes before I even looked at it. The soil was hard-packed down by winter and stubborn in that way land can be when left alone too long. But we turned it anyway. One row at a time, knees in the dirt, hands stained. No small talk, just the rhythm of women planting something together that might bloom later. We planted tomatoes, basil, a few sunflowers just to be defiant. We called it the quiet corner, and it became ours. We didn't talk about our children, not often. When we did, it wasn't out of bitterness, it was out of recognition, like looking at an old scar and remembering the moment before it broke the skin. What we shared wasn't grief. It was clarity, a new kind of belonging, not to each other, but to ourselves. In that space with soil under our nails and books nearby, I stopped feeling like a burden. I started feeling like a woman again. Not waiting, not missing, just here, present, rooted, like something finally ready to grow. It was a Saturday morning when I saw him again. I had just finished sweeping the front porch of the new house. The breeze was still sharp, but the sun had pushed through the clouds for the first time in days. I was about to go inside and make coffee when I noticed a car parked at the curb. Not a rental, not a delivery, just one familiar shape, still as stone behind the steering wheel. He sat there for a while before he got out, moved slower than I remembered. The confidence in his stride had dulled like someone who had spent the night thinking too long. He wore a gray hoodie jeans that hadn't been pressed. No folder, no pen, just a plain white envelope in his hand. He didn't come to the door right away, just sat down on the wooden steps like he had done as a boy when waiting for dinner. His back was hunched, his shoulders curled in, a shape I hadn't seen in years. I opened the door, stood there for a moment, then walked down, stopping a few feet from him. He looked up. The same eyes, but quieter. He said he was sorry, that he had been overwhelmed, that he had let money speak louder than love. He said things hadn't gone the way he thought they would. Then he paused, looked down at the envelope and held it out. I didn't take it. Not yet. He said he didn't expect anything. He just wanted me to know he saw it now. What he had done, what it had cost. I let the silence hold a little longer. Then I sat beside him. Not close, not far. Just enough for the wood to creak under both of us. I told him I forgave him, but I also told him forgiveness didn't come with a key, that some doors once closed needed time before they could open again, if they opened at all. He nodded, didn't argue, just nodded. We sat there a little longer. The wind brushed the porch rail. A bird hopped across the sidewalk without noticing us. He stood, said, "Thank you," placed the envelope beside me on the step, then walked back to his car. I didn't call after him, didn't wave. I watched him go. And when the car turned the corner and disappeared, I stayed seated. Not waiting, not grieving, just breathing. Because sometimes the first step back is not walking toward someone, it's knowing how to sit still without being pulled under. The first snow came early that year, thin and soft, like it wasn't sure it wanted to stay. I watched it fall from the kitchen window the same way I used to watch Owen wait for the bus when he was small. The world felt paused, but not empty, just still. I spent the morning in silence. No radio, no noise from the kettle, just the sound of the house breathing with me. I lit a fire in the stove and sat with a blanket across my lap, my hands wrapped around a warm mug. There was no sadness, no joy either. Just a kind of peace I hadn't known in years. A peace that didn't come from fixing things, but from knowing I didn't have to anymore. Later, I found myself writing a letter. Not to Owen, not to Mark, but to the woman I used to be. The one who thought love meant always saying yes. The one who thought being quiet kept things safe. I wrote to her gently, told her she was allowed to stop holding everything alone, told her she could sit down now. The weight had been carried far enough. I sealed the letter and tucked it between the pages of a book I no longer planned to finish. Some stories don't need endings, they just need release. That evening, I baked a small cake. Just one layer. Just for me. I lit a candle and placed it at the center. No one sang, no one clapped. I closed my eyes, and I made a wish that wasn't for anyone else. It was for my own stillness, for my own beginning, for a life that no longer needed to prove itself. I opened my eyes and blew out the flame. The room didn't feel quiet. It felt earned. If this story touched something quiet in you, maybe something you haven't said out loud in years, know that you're not alone. Every woman who's ever felt invisible still carries a fire that cannot be taken. If you've ever walked away from something that once defined you only to find your own voice waiting on the other side, I hope you carry that voice gently. And if you feel like sharing your own story, even just a piece of it, I'm listening. Because sometimes being heard is the first step back to being whole.